Once there was a time that had a sky of 2 moons. The second moon, which is no longer above, began to drift toward the sun. The fire of the sun made the moon illuminate the night sky nearly as much as the sun did the day. One day, men began to notice the moon crack. The moon was beginning to hatch like an egg. Little, small, black things that looked like a shadow with glowing red eyes began to spew out of the broken moon. The ones on earth feared the shadows. It was a horrible day. In that day there were 10 kingdoms. Each kingdom had a lord, but each one was ruled by the same one king. The kingdoms were on the brink of a civil war, but when the shadows descended upon them, they found themselves having to make a choice. The choice to die, or the choice to fight by the ones they were about to fight. The number of man's army was nearly 4 million. The shadows were about the same. When the first sword was swung into the shadows, the men noticed that it did no damage to the evil. The men ran and kept on running. Many of them were killed by the long black swords of their enemy. The men found themselves in a cave. They started a fire and the shadows walked in. The tallest of the shadows spoke in a language so evil none could stand the evil. Men fell onto their faces and screamed and wept. The king rose and drew his sword. He walked to the shadow that appeared to be the chief. The king swayed his sword. When the sword touched the shadow, it broke into 10 pieces. 3 of the pieces flew into the king's neck. He fell down. His blood came from his neck and mouth. He began to choke on his own blood. He died a few miserable minutes later. A butcher came forth and walked to a shadow. He used his best dagger. His father had given it to him when he was a young lad. He told him it was made of a metal that was unbreakable. He thought it to be no more than a story, but he thought he should test it on evil itself. He stabbed a shadow in the chest. The shadow withered away with a screech. The butcher yelled, "It's the only weapon we can use to defeat the shadows." He ran around stabbing the shadows until he came to the chief of them. He was about to stab it when the shadow threw his black evil sword into the neck of the butcher. Men began to run to the dagger, but all were killed before they reached it, until a blacksmith came. He picked the dagger up and he thrusted it into the shadow. The shadow withered and screeched, and all the other shadows left, for their leader had died. They say the shadows will return and will feed on the offspring of our own ancestors. The dagger was hidden away in a secret room in the castle, but the castle fell, and the dagger was lost in the ruins.